Thank you very much. It's my absolute pleasure to chair this first session here, where we are going to focus on the intersection between mine action and the HDP nexus. My name is Ági Veres, and I'm the director of UNDP in the Geneva office here, and I have an absolutely distinguished panel that will touch upon the topics of this first plenary session today. So let me start by welcoming all of you and welcoming our panelists, Mr. Saša Obradović, who is the director of the Mine Action Center in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Then Ms. Naomi Konza, who is the project coordination specialist for Mine Action for Human Development in UNDP Cambodia. Ms. Eileen Cohn, that I don't believe needs any further introduction, but welcome to our panel. And Ms. Jo Dresner, who is the Director of Policy at the Mine Action Group. Welcome, and thank you very much for contributing to this session. Allow me to just say a few words up front and try to put this first plenary session in the context of your discussions and our discussions moving forward. We are looking at a very important topic when we are trying to see how mine action fits into our overall efforts on the humanitarian development and peace nexus. This is something that we have been focusing on in the field, and I think we have very many good examples and success stories on how we are bringing together a response, a coordinated and an integrated response to crisis with humanitarian development and peace action. And having worked in the field and in field-facing positions over the last 20 years, I have really seen it firsthand how well it can work in the field without necessarily depending on hypothetical discussions on the nexus, but essentially do it in the field. And many of our colleagues are doing it day and night. Mine action, at the same time, is a fairly specialized field. So the question is, how do we connect this specialized technical field to a longer-term development perspective, to connect it to the immediate humanitarian action, and then bring it together with the entire peace actions and peace architecture that is there before, during, and after a crisis as well. So I think those are some of the questions we would like to explore a little bit during this session today, from a more high-level and strategic perspective to the operational at the field level. As many of you know, UNDP as an agency is committed to helping countries achieve the SDGs, build peaceful, just and inclusive societies, and recover from conflicts, and build sustainable institutions. As such, I think we have long realized that effective development is implemented and it can be successful if it's planned and initiated in a spectrum of before, during, and after crisis. We cannot consider crisis as just a trigger point for development action, for peace action and humanitarian action. We need to look at it as a footprint that we need to bring together from all the perspective that we are responding to a crisis that affects people's life on the ground. UNDP views mine action as a catalytic activity. It's an activity that contributes in meaningful ways to the broader goals of sustaining peace, security, human rights, and a crisis response by humanitarian peace and development action. We view mine action contributing to our efforts in various ways. I mean, first of all, it's really about connecting the humanitarian development and peace actions in the short term, but also setting the way for a longer-term ability for these countries to build development areas along the various development elements that we are all familiar with along the SDG targets and areas and goals. We are there for early recovery efforts and as accelerators for SDG implementation in crisis and in post-crisis settings. In the last decades, mine action has increasingly been recognized as essential to paving the way for sustainable development due to its contribution to improved livelihoods, access to services, and human security. Also, as you all know, mine action is often referred to as a precursor of humanitarian action, peace, and sustainable development. But I think other than just a precursor, it's something that we need to link to a longer-term impact and longer-term measures as well. Our experience demonstrates that indeed mine action can be a cornerstone in ensuring stabilization, preventing any relapse into conflict, and mine action is vital for saving lives and serves as enabler of long-term development and saving livelihoods as well. Mine clearance assists reintegration processes and a sense of security in the conflict to peace transitions. A key precondition, though, for success is strong national ownership, where the international community provides support, provides targeted capacity development of national partners, supports close collaboration, coordination, and promotes partnerships beyond the mine action sector. I recently headed UNDP's hub for Europe and Central Asia, and I have witnessed firsthand the negative impact of explosive ordnance and seen how landmines have crippled wider response plans, including our own development actions. For example, in the South Caucasus, mines and other explosive ordnance hindered swift reconstruction and safe return of IDPs. Building strong and robust national mine action capacity have therefore always been a priority for UNDP in the region and beyond, especially supporting mine action centers and mine action institutions. We all know that there are many areas of crisis in the world where this work is advancing. In Ukraine, for example, landmines and other explosive ordinances continue to hinder the humanitarian assistance, reaching the most vulnerable people, and we are seeing devastation we haven't seen in decades. Despite the efforts of state services, there is a need for more capacity building, and there is a need for more support in all of these settings. In other parts of the world, like Colombia, humanitarian mine action was used to build trust, community reconciliation, and transitional justice. In Tajikistan, safe access to cleared land laid foundation for improved livelihoods, agricultural development and employment, access to markets, and critical infrastructure. The goal of this particular panel, through the eyes of our colleagues and their experience, is to really take a look at the catalytic role of mine action in different contexts where the humanitarian development peace nexus approach is applied. So we very much look forward to the observations and the reflections on how mine action serves as an enabler of humanitarian response for development initiatives and for a longer-term peace process as well. Many of you may know who have been part of our actions that we recently launched the Nexus Academy out of Geneva. And the Nexus Academy is really looking at ways of how we can address collectively some of the remaining challenges of bringing development, humanitarian, and peace actions together. And I do believe that very specific support areas like mine action need to be provided with a closer link to our overall big picture interventions in these areas. So we're also looking forward to bringing it and supporting bringing it all together. And we look forward to a productive discussion during this plenary. So with that, let me bring in our panelists for the discussion today, and hopefully we will have some time afterwards for an interactive dialogue as well. If I may invite Mr. Sasha Obradovic first, who, as I mentioned, is the director of the Mine Action Center in Bosnia and Herzegovina, for sharing with us your perspective in this very important topic. The floor is yours.
Dear Chairman, Mrs. Versa, dear directors, specialists, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your opportunity to introduce you to Bosnia and Herzegovina efforts in achieve the goals set in Ottawa Convention in Article 5, the request to have mine-free country 2027. Next slide, please. Bosnia and Herzegovina is one of the countries facing major problem which represents danger for security of all citizens. According to first estimation from 1998, the suspected hazard area was 4,200 square kilometers on Bosnia and Herzegovina, or 8.2% of the territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Despite the progress made, there still remain 900 square kilometer suspected hazard area, or 1.7% of the Bosnia and Herzegovina territory. With an estimated number about 175 remaining mines are closer at 133 people directly enabled to mines in 118 municipalities in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Next slide, please. Land release, remove blockage, enable access to land of the project used to establish development, and the reason what this concept is crucial production for social economic growth and development of the country. Essential safe access to resource enable products use the areas and in the way increase the cultivate capacity to produce value. Land release is key to support development and renewal to infrastructure communication, which has wide implications for the growth factory of social economic development and sustainable infrastructure development. The removal of mines of explosive removal of the war is precondition for the renewable and development and residential of transport infrastructure to development of the agricultural sector and access to natural resources, as well as development of sustainable tourism projects. The most important things is created conditions for the safely moving of the citizen of the Bosnia and Herzegovina and the performance of the necessary life activity with mine dangers and treat to there of the safely. Next slide. Speaking about mine action in the context of the precondition for sustainable development, we have a number of examples in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Where in the previous contamination area there was construction of the roads, infrastructure projects, agricultural development, reconstruction and construction of houses, hotels, and similar. On the significant explain is constructor of the 5C corridor hard way, which has important role to trade flows and promote of the economic integrity of the Western Balkans with the European Union. A large number of the examples of the lands is result of the Brčko district at the project Brčko Free of Mines. Is being curricular implemented with large areas for agriculture will be released. In order on achieve sustainable economics wrong in infrastructure development, the mining is planned on the area of the Majevica mountain, which is located about two entities, Republika of Srpska and Federation. Also with the investment firm works of the Western Balkans, the implementation of the water management project among the countries, it's the Sava and Drina river based is planned, which the mining of the right bank of the Sava river is planned as condition for using active on the Sava river in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Next slide. There are currently 22 mine action organizations accredited in Bosnia and Herzegovina, of which 9 is commercial companies, 8 is our non-government, and 5 government organizations. We can be proud of the face the authorized personnels and engage in the mining activities all over Bosnia and Herzegovina, religious of nations, ethnics, religious of any types and affiliates, underacting joint efforts without any barriers, especially national barriers, is a cornerstone on peace and stability of the Bosnia and Herzegovina. Slide 6. It's very important to emphasize that Bosnia and Herzegovina has made significant progress in all areas in mine action, primarily due to close cooperation with partners, countries, and donors. However, take into account the size of the mine problems in Bosnia and Herzegovina, much more remains to be done. This essential in place continuity support from donors and international community, as well as additional funding to the mining and support terms of procurement of equipment for Bosnia and Herzegovina Mine Action Center. Also, it's necessary to have the full support of the high authorities on the level of the Bosnia and Herzegovina is all segments, including the harmonization of the legislative in existing international standards on Bosnia and Herzegovina. Thank you, and may I open for your questions or remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing with us this experience, and I think we can also appreciate the enormity of the task. It takes not just enormous capacities, but also a long time to clear the lands and release the land back. That affects longer-term economic and social development as well. So thank you for sharing that experience. If I can ask you to hold your questions until the end of our panelists, and then we can come back to Mr. Obradovic as well. With that, if I can turn to Ms. Naomi Konza, who is the Project Coordination Specialist for UNDP in Mine Action and Human Development in Cambodia. Over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning. I'd just like to start by sharing my appreciation for this opportunity to be a part of this session, particularly given the increasing relevance of this dialogue in Cambodia. Thank you. So as you know, Cambodia is a post-conflict state with a mature, nationally led mine action sector. And in the greater scheme of things, after 30 years of mine action, it's moving towards its final chapter of proactive landmine clearance, with the end of a generation of humanitarian demining on the horizon. Now, I must stress here while I say this, we cannot forget that Cambodia's remaining mine contamination is classified as massive. It's one of the highest in the world at over 700 square kilometres, which will require the mobilisation of around $200 million to clear. And I do take this opportunity to call on all states parties in a position to do so to continue and enhance cooperation and assistance towards clearance operations for peace and humanitarian efforts in the country. Because the results that are coming out of Cambodia are quite remarkable. Under the leadership of the Cambodian Mine Action and Victim Assistance Authority, and through clearance operations of the Cambodian Mine Action Centre and other national and international operators, Cambodia, despite severe resourcing constraints, through strong national coordination, effective planning and innovation, is achieving some of the highest global clearance rates and is evolving as a sector. It's applying lessons learned and revealing a new face of mine action with a perceivable shift towards leveraging off mine action for socio and economic development within affected populations. Next slide. You're all aware of Cambodia's history and the legacy of war, which has left her as one of the most heavily mined countries in the world. A country still in conflict at the time, the Cambodian Mine Action Centre was created in 1992 during the deployment of the United Nations Transitional Authority in Cambodia, given the recognition of the importance of mine action in supporting the pursuit of peace. When CMAX operations commenced, its mission was to clear transportation routes to enable the safe repatriation of hundreds of thousands of Cambodian refugees and displaced persons from Thailand. When clearance of the routes was completed, operations shifted to support the humanitarian resettlement of the returnees. Next slide. Since 1979, there have been nearly 65,000 casualties as a result of mines in ERW, including nearly 20,000 deaths. Although the annual number of casualties has been drastically reduced through clearance and explosive ordnance risk education, Cambodia suffers some of the highest numbers of casualties in the world. We heard during this week's intersessional meeting the importance of victim assistance and the humanitarian requirement to assist affected states to ensure victims and their families are provided with individualised support, rehabilitation and reintegration founded in the principles of dignity and respect. Today, throughout Cambodia, almost 1 million people are still living at risk, working, living in contaminated areas where mines and ERW continue to kill, injure and traumatise communities, severely impeding the country's recovery and development and constraining livelihood activities of rural communities. Next slide. The United Nations has been supporting the Royal Government of Cambodia in its mine action efforts since they commenced, and the UNDP Clearing for Results project has been our flagship project of support since 2006. Clearing for Results is nationally implemented through the National Authority, which was established in 2000 after Cambodia became a signatory to the Mine Ban Treaty, and the Royal Government recognised the need for Cambodia to better plan and manage its National Mine Action Program. Next slide. So Clearing for Results is designed around the humanitarian development peace nexus, with our three outputs focusing on the holistic intersectionality of the various pillars. One of the National Authority's initiatives, which is capitalising on the nexus and gaining great results, is the Mine-Free Village program. So while Cambodia's planning and prioritisations of minefields for clearance is already needs-driven and people-centred, involving consultations at the village level to ensure that local needs are met. The National Authority's Mine-Free Village program allocates targeted and dedicated resources from development partners and private sector to completely clear a village, removing any residual pockets of mine contamination that compromise the socio-economic and psychosocial benefits of landmine clearance to create pathways for recovery efforts through alignment with development projects. Under the Mine-Free Village program, Cambodia has had momentous achievement this year, declaring its first mine-free province in February, followed by its second in May, with more to come throughout the year. And through this program, UNDP is able to support an area-based development approach, utilising our convening power to align local needs of mine-free villages with opportunities. So, for example, Clearing for Results has been able to create links with UNDP energy projects, including solar mini-grids for unelectrified villages or solar water pumps for irrigation. So this is one of the dialogues that we're having with our development partners around asking them to look at their complementary foreign priorities, which can build off the foundation of mine action and scale up the development impact through a portfolio approach to local development based on UNDP's 6 signature solutions on poverty and inequality, governance, resilience, environment, energy and gender equality. Next slide. So we know that the UNMAS says that mine action is not just about clearing and releasing suspected land. It is about people and societies and how they are affected. However, the challenge is, how do we capture those intangibles that come with the human element? In mine action, it's easy to argue the peace and humanitarian dividends. Prevention of extremism and illicit activities, safe land, lives and limbs saved, etc. Yet globally, there seems to be a data gap around the issue of attribution. How can we quantify or calculate the catalytic nature of mine action and translate mine action into sustainable development dividends? The Gcsd UNDP project on mapping sustainable development outcomes of mine action identified mine action's direct contribution to 13 universal SDGs in Cambodia, and the report also noted that there is a need to continuously refine the methodical analysis of outcomes derived from mine action to strengthen evidence of the sector's role in fostering the triple nexus. And for UNDP as the SDG integrator, this is of particular importance. So in a sector where hard numbers are used as indicators, X number of mines removed, X hectares released, etc., it requires a paradigm shift to create the enabling environment which is conducive to thinking and achievement of development outcomes that take time to come to fruition. I am really excited to hear about the progress that's being made on the theory of change and supporting theories of actions, which are being developed with support of the Netherlands and the UK, to encourage collective responsibility of all stakeholders for achieving mine action outcomes. And again, this is increasingly important in our dialogue with development partners. being able to demonstrate evidence-based data that credibly validates what we already know, that returning safe land to communities for productive use indeed creates social, economic and environmental benefits in addition to the wellbeing and safety of people. And this is the experimental innovation that Cambodia is beginning to explore. Next slide, thanks. So Vieux Vong village is located in the northwest of Cambodia, up in Battambang province, on the Cambodian-Thai border along the K5 belt. Battambang is the most mine-affected province in Cambodia and has accounted for 24% of the country's total mine and ERW casualties. Next slide. In Vieux Vong alone, 49 people have been killed and injured by landmines and ERW, with minefields historically covering about the size of 120 football fields. It took 15 years to declare the village mine-free, with operations running from 2004 to 2019. So the first image was taken in 2016, 3 years before the last minefield was cleared, and the image on the right was from 2021, just 2 years after the village was declared mine-free. We can clearly see increased housing and infrastructure in just that short period of time. Next slide. So while that is quite a cosmetic example for illustrative purposes, UNDP, the National Authority and line ministries are exploring GIS data mapping and analysis of historical and current satellite images overlaid with various data sets, which we're hoping will allow us to identify patterns and trends to sharpen our vision and evidence-based articulation of mine action's sustainable development dividends. I mean, the stories of people alone speak to the transformational power of mine action. Next slide. To add to the data collection, over the past couple of years, Cambodia has been collecting pre and post clearance land use data for analysis through the National Authority's performance monitoring system. So this example again comes from a commune up on the northwest border there. And you can see there is a drastic increase in post-clearance land value and income generation from the sale of agricultural produce grown on the safe land. However, the data is shy, and we've not yet been able to measure the valuation of social wellbeing through lives saved, jobs created, what it means to have access to safe roads and communal water reservoirs. However, these factors all have a multiplier effect on communities' socio-economic development and prosperity. And further to that, we know that land use alone is an inadequate indicator of land productivity and household incomes. And without pathways to support targeted and accelerated development, released land is at risk of being safe, but ineffective in contributing to poverty reduction and improving overall development outcomes in target communities. For example, in this region, the reality on the ground is that about 70% of households own less than 1 hectare of land for agriculture, which they use for subsistence farming. And many families have incurred significant debt with high interest rates in order to invest in agricultural capital. Most debts cannot be paid down through agricultural income alone, and many families or family members migrate to Thailand to earn additional income to service the household debt. So this situation is demonstrative of the fact that while land is increasingly safe, additional support is required to improve land use planning and diversify livelihood opportunities in order to make headway on poverty reduction, particularly for the poorest and most vulnerable households. Next slide. So this requires a more hands-on approach in linking the released land to other development programs aimed to accelerate development across social, environmental and economic interventions. Through the new way of working, we need to identify opportunities to leverage off each other's comparative advantage with a principled approach that brings together duty bearers and rights holders with fundamental human rights at the core. If we're to apply a Nexus approach, there needs to be intentionality behind the effort, with full recognition that there are no quick fixes or silver bullets. Clearance as an intervention is only one touch point and doesn't alone produce the outcomes. Development in affected communities is a complex issue which involves the relationship of many messy variables which evolve to create the outcome. There needs to be a strong developmental vision for the cleared land that collectively considers social, environmental and economic systems. Next slide. Cambodia is a success story. It's founded in rapid post-conflict recovery, dramatic poverty reduction, and its emergence as a high-growth, lower middle-income country. The SDGs fully align with the royal government's long-term vision as articulated in Cambodia's Vision 2050 and its medium-term instruments, the Rectangular Strategy, National Strategic Development Plan, etc. Yet much work remains to not only get mines out of the ground and return safe land to affected communities, but with that, ensure that multidimensional vulnerabilities are addressed and people are given their lives back fully, able to participate inclusively with dignity in social and economic life. Clearing for Results through the National Authority and in partnership with line ministries and other UND projects and development partners are seeking to ensure linkages within planning mechanisms and organisations which take sector plans and strategies and filter them down to subnational plans for local development. This means a need to bring together all sectors, commerce and industry, agriculture and environment, social affairs, tourism, private sector, to support the reconstruction of key infrastructure and restoration of basic public services underpinned by robust governance, to enhance alignment of mine action with the state's capacity to plan and manage the ongoing development effort in line with its long-term vision for the country. Mine action is a successful tool for this development dialogue. We are seeing this not only at a national level but regionally. We've heard this week of the bilateral cooperation of both Cambodia and Thailand to the ongoing efforts regarding border clearance and the great gains that are being made there through the leadership and engagement of both states and their respective authorities and operators as each works towards their individual obligations. Next slide. So to truly gain peace, humanitarian and development dividends, we have an opportunity and an imperative to go beyond business as usual, to continue once the mines are out of the ground and engage all parties to leverage the Nexus approach in pursuit of a mine-free 2025, the 2030 agenda, and to ensure that no one is left behind. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for sharing the experience from Cambodia, but especially to make such a clear linkage from mine action to all the way to economic activity and also social rebuilding. And this shows us how important the linkage from mine action is to the SDGs. And we have established direct links to the SDG goals and targets, and we need to move from mine action as kind of an isolated silos activity to really build on those existing linkages and leading to economic and social rebuilding and activities. With that, I'd like to turn back to Ms. Eileen Cohn, the Director of UNMAS.
Thank you very much, Agi. I have to say I'm really encouraged by what I'm already hearing, so I really appreciate the remarks of both of the colleagues. And while I'm not going to be saying anything very different or very new, I think maybe the challenge from the UNMAS perspective is to be thinking about how the Nexus approach can be applied in the settings where we tend to work, which are much earlier in the transition from violence to post-conflict than the examples of Bosnia-Herzegovina are now, and Cambodia certainly now. So again, there's a little bit of layering and repetition, but please try to think about how we're coming at this in some of the countries and territories where we're working. Of course, even in these places that UNMAS is present, mine action is always an enabler of humanitarian and development and peace work. And I'd like to think about, after illustrating how that comes about, maybe suggest that we think about how to join forces to produce shared situation analyses in these contexts to better underpin our joint planning and prioritizing across the actors working in the sector, and also perhaps suggest that we might make a more concerted effort to integrate mine action, as you've already all mentioned, into larger national and international humanitarian stabilization and development planning and budgeting processes, which in some of the countries I'll mention now are at, as I said, a much earlier phase. So an example of mine action enabling the humanitarian response most recently for us might be in 2021 in Ethiopia's Tigray region. where explosive risk assessments that UNMAS has carried out along humanitarian corridors has enabled safe access of humanitarian workers to populations in need. This was a kind of urgent response. Mine action as an important precursor to development and an accelerator of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, certainly illustrated in Iraq, where in 2021 we've cleared the Bab al-Saray market in Mosul, the hospital in Sinjar, and a vast swath of land earmarked by the government to build a new Ramadi. In Gaza, we've been conducting some 300 to 400 risk assessments that allow for rubble removal caused during the violence a year ago, May 2021, and has enabled, of course, construction of houses, power plants, and water treatment facilities. And we have a number of examples of mine action contributing to peacemaking and peace building. We know that mine action has often contributed to mediation efforts by providing mediators with a tool for building trust among parties to conflict and instilling confidence in peace processes among civilians who may be skeptical. This was the case in South Kordofan, Sudan, in the early 2000s when cross-line demining teams of the Sudan Armed Forces and the SPLA worked together to deliver a peace dividend to the population. And more recently, in 2016, as you mentioned, the peace agreement in Colombia between the government and the FARC established a civilian demining organization, Humanitarian, that's comprised of former combatants, and helps to ease their reintegration to civilian life by ensuring that they're employed in a way that enables them to be of service to the communities that have suffered through many decades of conflict there. That peace agreement also requires combatants to provide information on the location of explosive ordnance, and so far our effort to elicit that information and respond to it has led to some 80 reports of contamination that have been compiled for clearance. Turning a bit to the peace and security pillar where UNMAS resides, the Security Council has recognized the role that mine action plays in advancing peace and security. We have Security Council mandates to undertake mine action in 5 special political missions and 9 peacekeeping operations. And these operations manage to both address the mobility of the peacekeepers as well as the safety of communities. So, for example, the UNIFIL peacekeeping operation in Lebanon extends the tasking of its demining contingents to clear areas that are important and identified by the Lebanese Mine Action Center, but also are important to the peacekeeping operation because in delivering safe land to Lebanese communities, we can also be ensuring the safe mobility of UNIFIL troops. In many places where peacekeepers cannot deploy safely because of explosive ordnance threats, humanitarian protection and stabilization efforts can grind to a halt. So UNMAS provides risk awareness training to civilian peacekeepers and UN system partners, but also provides training to uniformed peacekeepers operating in high-threat environments. And this is particularly the case in Mali in the context of the MINUSMA peacekeeping operation. We want to help peacekeepers deploy safely so that they can perform their protection of civilians mandates and so that they can enable humanitarian assistance, community engagement, and human rights monitoring, all things that peacekeeping operations do. And for many years, as some of you know, we've been working with the uniformed contingents in Mali to enable them to better search and detect and reduce the casualties, which really are awful, enabling them, as I said, to better protect the civilians in Mali. Now, because I know that we're going to have a side event on operationalizing the Nexus, and I think that's where the rubber meets the road on this concept tomorrow, I'm going to make just a couple of suggestions for what we might consider there. I think that perhaps if national authorities and all of us who are implementing actors collaborated more closely on situational analyses, and not just among ourselves, but perhaps with others who are analyzing the situation from the perspective of political and security issues, we may be more effective in designing responsive plans and in representing our proposals to donors. So I'm calling for a shared understanding of the situation in which we're operating, not only as it relates to contamination and its impact, but to the context more generally. And that may include a regional situational awareness and not only a national or local situational awareness. I'd also like to suggest that the mine action stakeholders, mine action sector, advocate jointly and more concertedly, as you already assured me is happening in some places, to include mine action in humanitarian and development planning processes. Some of you are members of the Interagency Standing Committee. It's a forum that brings together 18 United Nations and non-United Nations humanitarian partners. They've undertaken a review of good practices in the implementation of this Nexus approach, and they have found that when peacekeeping operations and humanitarian and development planning are complementary, progress can be made more exponentially. So an example of that might be in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where, as the peacekeeping operation MONUSCO there plans to draw down, a working group was established that brought together IOM, UNHCR, the UN police, and UNMAS, that are both components of the peacekeeping operation, to think about reducing the risks to civilians as the mission reconfigures. And consequently, when MONUSCO did withdraw from Kasai Central last year in June, and as we withdraw now from Tanganyika province, we've found that that planning, that joint planning, has improved the security situation and offers then an opportunity to accelerate the development agenda in those places. But that same IASC review of the Nexus approach has found that while there has been some progress made when peace, humanitarian, and development actors coordinate their analysis, their planning, and their programming, this in reality has been limited to just a few countries. And an additional review of the humanitarian protection policy has found that in some contexts where humanitarian development and peace actors operate together, their joint efforts are hampered by competition for funding and by territoriality, which is regrettable. And I hope that we will avoid a dynamic such as that one as we seek to work together to ensure that mine action, for example, in the Ukraine, where the devastation will require a multi-year response and quite a lot of resources. I hope that we'll be working together there to understand the situation, plan jointly, and fully incorporate mine action in recovery and reconstruction planning. If the donors want to be assured that mine action is in fact catalyzing development or peace-building processes, then they can help us to play an important role. They can play themselves an important role in ensuring that mine action is better integrated into national stabilization and development planning processes. So I really call on the donors to break the silos that also occur in their own government structures to really help mine action come out of the silo, as Aggie describes, and break into these larger development processes. National directors, what an enormous role you have to play in advocating in your own countries, as in Bosnia-Herzegovina example, to ensure that your work is reflected in the larger financial and development planning that goes on locally. And of course, the work of following up longitudinally to see whether the early planning results in development outcomes. This is, of course, best done by the actors who remain on the ground, and these are the national authorities and the national directors and the national NGOs. And so the kind of information that you're able to bring from UNDP Cambodia about the development outcomes that were delivered, the span of time that you're referring to is quite long. It's not the span of time where UNMAS would be present. So we really have to rely in the kind of work that we might catalyze with you on others to undertake the metrics, apply the metrics, and report on the results over the long term. So this attribution data that you referred to, we really have to count on a joined-up approach to obtain it. Not all of us are going to be around long enough to participate in that, but we certainly hope that we're catalyzing it. So in closing, as we've heard many times, and we know we do all represent a sector that enables humanitarian, enables peace, enables the development aspects of this nexus. But I do think that we could advance our shared objectives even more effectively if we join forces to produce shared situation analyses and to advocate more effectively for the inclusion of mine action in multidimensional peace-building development, planning, budgeting, and programming processes. And I look forward to hearing what outcomes you bring from the side event tomorrow, where you'll be thinking about operationalizing this. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, and I think we also very much appreciate your call for the collective efforts and then also to focus on the longer-term impact that we may not all be part of, but we may all contribute to and hopefully catalyze with the mine action. Last but not least, if I can turn to you, Joe. So Ms. Jo Dresner, who is the Director of Policy at the Mine Action Group. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the organisation, to the organisers of the event for inviting MAG to speak today. Our vision is a safe future for women, men and children affected by violence, conflict and insecurity. We're a global humanitarian organisation operational for 33 years, delivering transformational change for some of the most vulnerable people in the world and in some of the most fragile places in the world. MAG aims to support people to live in communities where their rights are upheld and dignity and choice and freedom of fear from mines, explosive remnants of war and the impact of armed violence. As we've already heard from the other panellists, the links between mine action and the humanitarian development and peace-building nexus can be clearly drawn. Mine action has long been recognised as a cross-cutting issue, even before we had nexus language to articulate it. But it hasn't always worked in our favour as a sector, as our collective work doesn't fit neatly into one box. And certainly from a donor perspective, this has sometimes made it challenging to identify where funding would come from. So it does make the triple nexus concept a useful one, particularly in terms of helping to break down silos and recognising the importance of improved cross-sector integration. Working in partnership is a cornerstone of MAG's approach to both mine action and broader armed violence reduction, in the firm belief that genuine and purposeful dialogue and cooperation can achieve far more than the sum of its parts. Today, I will focus in depth on one specific partnership that I believe addresses the triple nexus to a significant extent, and will pick up in particular on Eileen's point about situational analysis. In a lot of ways, this will be articulated in terms of conflict sensitivity, but the fact is that conflict sensitivity is absolutely dependent on coherent situational analysis from the local to the national and up to the regional level, again, as Eileen has mentioned. Over the past 12 months, MAG has established a comprehensive strategic partnership with International Alert, a leading international peace-building organisation with 35 years of experience supporting communities and advising governments, NGOs and other organisations. As I mentioned, this draws on a conflict sensitivity lens in recognition of the impact that development and humanitarian programming can have on peace and security, especially in fragile and conflict-affected settings. Through MAG's mine action and armed violence reduction activities, we have a wide range of relationships from the community, local and provincial level to government ministries, militaries and police through regional organisations such as ECOWAS and the ASEAN Regional Mine Action Centre, and of course at the international level with the UN, donors and other NGOs. At the same time, mine action activities affect many aspects of people's lives, whether they can return home, how much money they can earn from their land, and whether they can access the services they need. Our work also impacts communities simply through the provision of jobs or payment for supplies. In turn, every person affected by our actions may play a role in peace building. The aim of this practice is to ensure that, at a minimum, MAG's activities do no harm to the communities we serve, reduce the risk of harm to staff and partners, and wherever possible, and the focus of our discussions today, help to bring about sustainable peace. In recent years, MAG has explored a number of avenues to embedding improved conflict sensitivity practice in our work. Ultimately, we reached the conclusion that this was an opportunity to forge stronger links with the peace-building community, while also improving the intersection of our work with humanitarian and development programming. I would like to particularly recognise the contribution of Sweden, who have supported some of this work. And again, I would echo Eileen's sentiments that to do full and the necessary situational analysis at every level does require significant capacity and resources, and therefore shared efforts are very, very much welcome from MAG's perspective. MAG identified International Alert as a partner of choice to bring technical expertise in conflict sensitivity with the capacity to support MAG's operations across all regions. The partnership is intended to improve conflict sensitivity within MAG, building internal capacity over time while also benefiting from Alert's expertise and support in developing practice from the start. In turn, as part of its organisational strategy, Alert addresses the root causes of conflict and champions conflict sensitivity within the wider humanitarian conflict prevention and development sectors. This strategic partnership with MAG pilots an innovative approach that, if successful, could provide a model to help embed conflict sensitivity across the wider humanitarian sector. Alert's experience in supporting the integration of conflict-sensitive practices includes peace and conflict analyses, gender sensitivity practice and tools, conflict-sensitive operations, conflict-sensitive program design, monitoring, learning, and evaluation. This experience provides support to MAG in two ways: through a help desk mechanism run by an international team in Alert's conflict hub in London, and through direct support from Alert regional programs teams to their MAG counterparts. Alert teams are also able to carry out work in support of MAG activities, including supporting context analysis and impact studies. In practice, the support can range from producing induction guidance for new staff to carrying out conflict sensitivity reviews of project reports. For the next 12 months, the principal project for the help desk is the development and rollout of an organisational conflict sensitivity framework. This will involve, wherever possible, adjusting existing tools such as stakeholder mapping, risk analysis, and impact assessment using a conflict sensitivity lens. And I do believe that the opportunities for sharing learning from that exercise will be significant. The objective is to embed this approach wherever MAG works globally in both mine action and armed violence reduction. But here I would like to highlight some contextual applications of these tools as a means of operationalizing the triple nexus. The needs assessment conducted by Alert through extensive interviews with MAG staff identified a number of key priorities. Firstly, the incorporation of a conflict sensitivity lens in baseline assessments is a key priority. Large population movements across mine-affected countries and regions as a result of conflict, food insecurity, and climate change, such as in the Horn of Africa, require an additional level of awareness around intercommunal tensions and competition for resources. When overlaid with transhumance patterns, a granular approach of conflict sensitivity risks is needed, not only to avoid doing harm, but also to identify the most significant opportunities for development and durable solutions. A key example is the equatorial region of South Sudan, both the most fertile and the most mine-contaminated land in the country. At a time when the World Food Programme has been able to raise only 18% of the funds needed to address food shortages in the Horn of Africa, leading to tapering of World Food Programme provisions to South Sudan, the need to accelerate agricultural development is critical, and this requires mine action as a prerequisite. This example is powerfully illustrative of the significance of mine action in the HDP nexus. Recognition of the links between mine action and agriculture is not new, but a conflict-sensitive baseline and peace and conflict analysis allows us to move to a proactive understanding of how to make the most of these links. And I believe that the term that one of the other panelists used was intentionality, and I think that's really important here. When going through our internal needs assessment in terms of looking at things through a conflict sensitivity lens, land rights issues also emerged as a key concern. My colleague will speak tomorrow at a side event on housing, land and properties in housing, land and property rights in mine action, co-organised by the mine action and HLP areas of responsibility. To contribute to this important and ongoing discussion, MAG has been able to draw on lessons learned from an initiative undertaken together with NRC in Iraq. This focuses on integrating HLP considerations into mine action to avoid causing harm or exacerbating disputes. At the same time, it provides an opportunity to contribute to positive protection outcomes by referring any potential HLP issues to specialist organisations. This approach to lesson learning is itself an example of cross-sector partnership, as well as the important convening role the UN can play in bringing together such discussions. A key area of interest that also emerged in our internal discussions is how MAG can make more of the community and state links that we have naturally through our work, as I articulated earlier, to contribute to peace-building goals. In Senegal, MAG is working closely with CNAMS on information management and hopes to begin technical activities also in coordination with Humanitarian Inclusion, who are also providing ongoing support. With expert input from International Alert, MAG is focusing on developing a deeper understanding of the peace and conflict dynamics in Casamance through a peace and conflicts assessment. Again, comprehensively deconflicted with work already being undertaken by HI. This assessment will inform the strategic direction of the MAG Mine Action Programme and contribute to broader discussions for the mine action sector in Senegal, with a particular focus on the interaction between peace building and durable capacity development. This has been an examination of one key partnership through which MAG is operationalising the role of mine action in the Triple Nexus, and every contextual case study could be a presentation in itself. There are also many other partnerships, and I do believe that the principle of partnership is one that we need to continue to come back to when talking and thinking about the Triple Nexus. I would like to take the opportunity to thank International Alert for their ongoing support and collaboration during what has been a truly fascinating and valuable series of discussions to date. On that note, from a MAG perspective, we would greatly welcome a more extensive discussion on this topic, that is on the interaction between mine action and the Triple Nexus, with particular focus on bringing partners from outside the mine action sector into the room. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Joe Dresner, the Director of Policy and Mine Action Group. With that, we concluded the first part of this panel, and the panelists really spoke to the fact how an integrated approach is needed around mine action, how it's vital for saving lives, but also saving livelihoods as a precursor for peace building and a precondition for longer-term development. So I also want to thank the panelists for keeping us more or less on time, which allows us to open the floor for some questions, reflections, and a little bit of discussion. I will allow that until around 11:56, 57, and then we'll take a few minutes just to close the session. So the floor is open. If you could indicate by our usual signal of turning your signs, then I can call on questions and reflections. And if my eyesight is not the best to the back, you can also put your hand up. That may be easier.
We have one over here.
Ah, please. Thank you very much. If you could start by introducing yourself.
Thank you. Sorry. My name is Lindsay Cottrell from the Conflict and Environment Observatory. I was very welcome to hear from UNDP about the view on the need to include social, economic and environmental considerations with respect to mine action. I just wanted to ask if there are any specific environmental indicators that have been considered to assess environmental outcomes so far with respect to land release. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would collect just a couple more, and then we go back to the panelists. Please, from Iraq, if I see it correctly.
Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Jasmine Falahi, Minister of Environment, Republic of Iraq, head of the Iraqi Demyelination Program. Regarding the association and the high relationship between the Sustainable Development Goals and demyelinations, considering my country as one of the most important polluted country in the world with mine and IEDs, because of decades of war and instability and fighting the terrorist action in spite of all the words by governments supporting this linkage. And we support the a very appreciated efforts between UNMAS and UNDP, who play a great role in supporting our government, supporting the Iraqi countries, Iraqi people, and cleaning the impact of the decades of war and instability. And just I want to know about the roadmap to implement this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question and reflection. I would like to take perhaps one more, if I can bring you in here.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Stefano Toscano, I'm the director of the Gcsd, and it's a great pleasure to be here today at the National Director meeting and also to participate in this important panel on an important topic. To us, this is about being able to demonstrate the continued and even enhanced relevance of mine action for a series of agendas out there. And for us to be able to conceptualize, act upon, and document that relevance is going to be an important role even in enhancing and not ensuring, but certainly enhancing the future of mine action. It was mentioned, I think, by one of the panelists that we had the pleasure of cooperating closely with UNDP in conceptualizing the linkages that relate mine action to the Sustainable Development Goals. There was a study that we produced jointly in 2017, and jointly, but also separately, we worked on a number of countries to try and understand and document that linkages. Most recently, for example, in Colombia. And one would really see how mine action can contribute to various agendas, including the peace agenda. And there is a lot of potential for this. I would also be looking forward to the panel tomorrow when those things would be operationalized. But maybe one point that I would like to make is, of course, those linkages are very much context dependent. And here I come back to the point raised by Joe in terms of conflict sensitivity, but also to the importance of understanding that in complex emergency situation, mine action is and will remain first and foremost a humanitarian activity. And so it is important that it remains confined within a humanitarian space. That does not mean that linkages cannot be anticipated over time, but one needs to remain careful where to go and where not to go in this particular situation. If we're talking about post-conflict situation, of course, this is a completely different aspect. And coming back to the complex emergency, this is where I feel conflict sensitivity will play an increasingly important role. And it is very interesting what Meg was mentioning, and we would be interested very much to maybe also discuss with you over this concrete point in the future. Thank you so much for giving me the floor.
Thank you very much for your contribution and also on the reflections of the interlinkages. And I do hope that we will have more time in some of the side sessions and following sessions to flesh them out. I would like to go back to the panelists, but if I may just have some indications if anybody else would like to still come in afterwards. So we'll take one quick round with the panelists, and I have Germany and the DRC. I saw you wanted to come back on probably on the environment targets, or if you would like to reflect on any other points, Naomi.
Yes, thank you for that. I think that the concept of environment within mine action is emerging as a dialogue. I know that at an individual program level, UNDP undertakes social and environmental screenings, but I believe there is a lot of work to be done there, and I think that the Mine Action Review recently released a paper on mitigating the environmental impacts of explosive ordnance and land release, because it is something that needs to be explored further. One of the things that we're hoping to understand by some of our data mapping that I mentioned was that if we can overlay protected lands, conservation lands, Indigenous lands with clearance, and actually understand how clearance, what that does for deforestation, you know, what it does for land use, does clearing in protected lands actually create pathways for illegal logging? What happens when we don't remove mines? Is there leakage? You know, what happens to topsoil degradation as we do clear lands? I think there is so much unknown, and I do believe that there is a side event that I might be mistaken, that over the next couple of days that was actually going to delve into this, and I think that is supported by MPA or Mine Action Review. So that's something that I'm going to be attending with interest, because I think it's a topic that we need to pay more attention to in the sector.
Thank you very much, Naomi. And Joe, I think you have a few points on these reflections.
Thank you. Just very briefly, first of all, on Lindsay's point, actually, the environment was also something that came up repeatedly in the discussions with International Alert, in the needs assessment. So this is something certainly that, again, we'll be kind of picking up from the conflict sensitivity lens angle, and we'll be happy to share what we do on that. I think on the environment, there are two angles. One is the impact of the operations, and then the other is the interaction between climate change, insecurity, displacement, and so on. And I think that is an angle that has been less talked about, but one that is increasingly important. I will just leave that there. I just thought it was important to note. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to give the floor to Germany and then to the DRC.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor, and thank you for this wonderful conference. I will make 3 points, if I may. One is more in general. I think the triple nexus is crucial, and from our experience, at least in the past, at least for Germany, that it was very much focusing on the nexus between development and the mine action. And I think we have to take even more into consideration the aspect of stabilization, which was made by the speakers. My second point, turning to Mr. Abradovic, and thank you for your intervention. One is rather a question. You noted down and made the point that companies are most productive. So this means more productive than NGOs, for example. I took this with interest, this information, which might be slightly different to the experience I have. And a very specific point here, the example you gave with the Majevica region, we are very happy to support this nexus. And from our planning perspective, here we take into consideration from the very beginning the nexus between mine action and then development of tourism in that region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to now give the floor to the representative from the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente, pour la...
Thank you very much, Mrs. Chair, for giving me the floor. I would like to get the opinions of panelists. I have the impression that in some countries there are armed conflicts, and sometimes it is difficult to go from the emergency phase to the development phase. So is there not a need to have an interagency cooperation. It is the case, for example, for the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in order to facilitate this transition. I have the impression that after a situation of an emergency, there can be a rupture and a breaking point, and we don't move towards a development action. This is just a point I wanted to raise.
I think you raised some interesting and important points there. If I may just scout the room to see if anybody else would like to come in. Yes, please, in the back. Yes.
Hello, my name is Mak Nukic Kachpur. I'm from the Duxo project. One of the avenues of our work is in data acquisition and advocacy by presenting data in an interactive and engaging way for both public and private engagement. And so one of the questions we had was regarding the well-being indicators. So we were wondering if there were any plans or programs to standardize well-being indicators as like assessment of cleared areas and the effectiveness of clearance and demining activities in cleared areas. So standardized not just basic needs indicators, but also well-being indicators.
Thank you very much. There were some references in our interventions on the measurements, so I think it's important to look at then how do we connect data and indicators to the actions. From Algeria, yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to take up this very important subject, especially for those directly. My delegation, in fact, agrees to take into account the development aspect on a sustainable basis, which take into account firmly needs on the national level. The Oslo Program of Action had pointed out that it is taken for granted on a wide level that mine action is a means to save lives. It is also a main factor that enables the achievement of development and humanitarian action, peace and security. It also stressed the need to contribute to stressed that UNMAS helped in achieving sustainable development goals within a comprehensive and integrated viewpoint. Algeria, as the chair of the Committee of Victim Support, I would like to stress the importance of this subject in collective efforts to relieve the suffering of victims, to enable them to earn a livelihood and become better integrated in their societies. We have to provide health and financial and material support. I would like to know the view of the panelists regarding those aspects of complementarity between collective efforts and implementation at the various levels, and the implementation of the agreement itself in reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the contribution from Algeria. I don't see any other hands up, so if I can turn back to our panel. If I may turn to you first, and then we'll bring in the rest.
Sorry. Yes, I must remind all participants, it's Germany, it's country partner from Bosnia and Herzegovina in mine action. And the been good products of the work on the mountain Majevica, we must plan very good to all indicators and prioritization of that huge projects on Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's very important the good cooperation with donors, municipality, cantons, and also a lot of agency who is include on the development projects on that mountains. Also, we have good cooperation with OSCE in Bosnia and Herzegovina, who is preparing next projects from infrastructure of the canton on the mountain Majevica. Also, it's land release projects. It's very important for Bosnia and Herzegovina. We are started with 2016. We are changed all operation on the field, and capacity who is the have in Bosnia and Herzegovina for the mining. It's very big, and we are planning to do it that activity with two organizations, MAG and MPA, who is the cover all projects on that part. I hope so. The project is being open very soon, and also all planning it must be very strictly with national operators, municipality, also with organization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Obradovic. If I may go back to you, Eileen, to perhaps reflect on some of the bigger concepts and the overarching reflections vis-à-vis mine action in the humanitarian development peace nexus.
Thanks very much. I think I share in the expression of questions and concerns more than I can really offer answers. And so I would just say that if I followed well the intervention of the colleagues from the DRC, I would certainly agree that we have a big challenge in supporting coherent, coordinated planning and financing, not only for mine action, but for general coherent planning as we transition in any given location from a complex emergency or conflict circumstance to a post-development. And so I think that in the UN we've tried very hard to try and join ourselves up, and we commiserate often about that difficulty, and I don't know that there's an example of a best way to manage it. But it's something to take up tomorrow in the operationalization discussion, and I certainly would agree with you that that's often where planning for the longer term breaks down, is in the transition. The comment from the colleagues from Algeria, again, I can only say that I too am looking forward to how these collective and shared aspirations can turn into actual implementation. It is very difficult for colleagues working in a peacekeeping setting to connect to development planning, and I look forward to really thinking with the donors who lead those efforts in many countries, with the national authorities who drive them, and I honestly share the question. I don't have an answer for you. I would only echo what Stefano Toscano said, that each circumstance is very, very specific, that the linkages are context specific, and echo again what Joe said and what Stefano said about the need for conflict sensitivity analysis and a real shared situation analysis in each location. But from there, how to really ensure that the planning is coherent from a complex emergency across a transition and into development, not just for mine action, but mine action within all these larger infrastructure and environmental and development plans. Well, how do we go from aspiration to reality? I hope we have some answers tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Eileen. With that, I think we came to the end of our sessions, and perhaps without repeating any of the rich discussions that we had, I do believe that some of these reflections and unanswered questions require a bit more discussion, but most importantly, they point to the fact that we are all in the phase of collective thinking and collective action of how effectively and in a very results-oriented way bring mine action closer to the longer-term results, to social and economic development. And I think in this, in addition to the collective efforts and cooperation of the actors working on it, the role of national governments and national ownership is extremely important, as that's the viewpoint how you all see the development needs and the strategies that are actually connecting all of these fields and bringing the practitioners together who are supporting the national efforts from various perspectives. So with that, let me close this session and thank our panelists for their wonderful contribution, and thank for all of you for your attention and your participation. And I hope that we can dwell into these topics at the following plenaries, breakout sessions and side events as well. Thank you very much.